The autumn sun streamed through the airport windows as 17-year-old Amara Jackson waited in line to board her flight. She squeezed her small backpack against her chest, feeling the outline of her inhaler in the front pocket. Flying always made her a bit nervous, not because she was afraid of planes, but because the dry cabin air sometimes triggered her asthma. "Next passenger, please," called the gate agent with a friendly smile. Amara stepped forward and handed over her boarding pass. "Heading to see your grandmother, right?" the agent asked, recognizing her from check-in earlier. Amara nodded with a smile. Her grandmother had been feeling under the weather lately, and Amara was making the cross-country trip to help out for a few weeks. "Enjoy your flight, honey. Safe travels," the agent said, handing back her boarding pass. Amara made her way down the jet bridge, counting the rows as she entered the plane. Her seat was near the back, 28A, a window seat. She slid in, relieved to find that the middle seat was still empty. Maybe she'd get lucky and have a bit more space on this full flight. As passengers continued boarding, Amara took out her phone to text her mom that she was on the plane. Then she carefully placed her inhaler in the seat pocket in front of her, making sure it was easily within reach. Her doctor had always told her to keep it handy during flights, just in case. "Is this 28B? A friendly-looking older man with a newspaper tucked under his arm pointed to the seat beside her. "Yes, it is," Amara replied, moving her backpack to make room. "Thanks. Long flight ahead of us, huh?" he said as he settled in. "I'm Tom, by the way, Amara, and yeah." "About 5 hours," she replied. More passengers filed in, filling the cabin with the sounds of shuffling feet, overhead bins snapping shut, and scattered conversations. The plane was nearly full when Amara noticed a flight attendant making her way down the aisle. There was something about her demeanor that caught Amara's attention. The tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, the way she seemed to be scrutinizing each passenger. "Good afternoon," the flight attendant announced at the front of their section. "My name is Deborah Winters, and I'll be one of your flight attendants today." Her voice had a practiced pleasantness to it, but there was an unmistakable coolness underneath. Amara watched as Deborah moved through the cabin, checking seat belts and overhead bins. When she reached their row, her eyes lingered on Amara for a beat longer than seemed necessary before moving on. Amara felt a twinge of uneasiness but brushed it off. She was probably just being oversensitive. The last few passengers boarded, and the middle seat next to Amara remained empty, a small blessing on a packed flight. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing their flight time. The safety demonstration began and Amara half-watched, having seen it many times before. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Amara felt that familiar flutter in her stomach. Not fear, just the slight excitement of taking off. She looked out the window, watching the ground crew step away from the plane. The engines rumbled to life, vibrating through the cabin as they taxied toward the runway. Tom had opened his newspaper but glanced over at her. "First time flying?" he asked kindly. "No, I've flown a bunch of times," Amara said with a small laugh. "Going to visit my grandma in Philadelphia. She's not been feeling well lately." "That's thoughtful of you," Tom said. "I'm sure she'll appreciate having you there." The plane lined up on the runway, engines growing louder. Amara took a deep breath as they accelerated, pressing her back against the seat. The pressure built in her chest, normal for takeoff but always a bit uncomfortable with her asthma. She felt the wheels leave the ground and watched as the airport grew smaller below them. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began adjusting in their seats. The drink service started at the front of the plane. Deborah and another flight attendant worked their way down the aisle, offering beverages and small snacks. Amara noticed something odd as she watched Deborah interact with passengers. With some mostly older white passengers, she was all smiles and friendly chatter. With others, particularly the few black and brown passengers, her demeanor changed subtly. Her smile stayed in place, but her eyes grew colder, her interactions briefer. It was the kind of thing you might not notice unless you were looking for it. The slight differences in how she addressed people, how long she lingered, whether she made eye contact. When Deborah reached their row, she offered a warm smile to Tom. "What can I get for you today, sir?" "Just a coffee black, please," Tom replied, folding his newspaper. Deborah handed him the coffee with care. "There you go. Careful, it's hot." Then she turned to Amara, her smile thinning almost imperceptibly. "And for you?" Her tone was noticeably cooler. Apple juice. Please? Amara said. Deborah handed her the plastic cup without comment and immediately moved to the next row, not waiting to see if Amara needed anything else. Tom raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Amara shrugged it off. It wasn't worth making a fuss over. She'd experienced this kind of treatment before, the subtle differences in how people sometimes treated her compared to her white friends. It was frustrating and hurtful, but she'd learned to pick her battles. About 30 minutes into the flight, Amara felt the first hint of tightness in her chest. The cabin air was dry and the pressure changes were starting to affect her breathing. She tried taking slow, deep breaths, but the tightness persisted. She glanced at her watch. Still over 4 hours to go. She knew from experience that it was better to use her inhaler early, before the symptoms got worse. Amara reached into the seat pocket for her inhaler, her fingers closing around the familiar shape. As she pulled it out, she noticed Deborah watching her from the galley area, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Amara held the inhaler in her lap, waiting for the flight attendant to look away, suddenly feeling self-conscious. But Deborah didn't look away. Instead, she walked purposefully toward Amara's seat. "What do you have there?" Deborah asked, her voice sharp enough to make nearby passengers look up. "It's my inhaler," Amara explained, holding it up. "I have asthma." "I need to see that," Deborah said, holding out her hand. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Confused but not wanting to cause a scene, Amara handed it over. "I just need to use it quickly. The air in the cabin sometimes triggers my asthma." Deborah examined the inhaler with exaggerated scrutiny, turning it over in her hands. "Was this declared during boarding?" What?" Amara was genuinely confused. "It's just my prescribed inhaler. I've never had to declare it before." "All medications should be declared," Deborah stated firmly, though this wasn't actually airline policy. "Especially these days, we can't be too careful about what passengers bring on board." Amara felt her heart rate increasing, which wasn't helping her breathing. "I've flown dozens of times with my inhaler. It's never been an issue before." Tom looked up from his newspaper, frowning at the interaction. A few other passengers were watching now, too. "I'm going to need to keep this with me for the remainder of the flight," Deborah said, pocketing the inhaler. "If you need it, you can come to the galley and use it under supervision." "That doesn't make any sense," Amara said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing anxiety. "I might need it quickly if I have an attack. Please give it back." "I'm following protocol," Deborah insisted, though her eyes flickered with something that looked like satisfaction. "If you continue to be disruptive, there will be consequences." Amara sat back, stunned. She hadn't been disruptive at all. She'd simply tried to use her prescribed medication. She looked around, hoping someone might speak up, but most passengers had returned to their books or screens, unwilling to get involved. Tom gave her a sympathetic look but remained silent. As Deborah walked away with her inhaler, Amara felt a knot forming in her stomach. The flight had just begun and already she was feeling vulnerable and humiliated. And worse, she was now without the medication she might desperately need. She pulled out her phone, thinking she should text her mom, but then remembered airplane mode. She was on her own, at least for now. Amara took slow, careful breaths, trying to stay calm. The tightness in her chest hadn't worsened yet, but she knew from experience how quickly that could change. What Amara didn't know was that several passengers had noticed the interaction. An older woman 3 rows ahead had turned around and was watching with concern in her eyes. A young man across the aisle had paused his movie, and Dr. Priya Sharma, seated 2 rows behind Amara, had observed the entire exchange with growing alarm. As a pulmonologist who specialized in respiratory conditions, she recognized the seriousness of what had just happened. The minutes ticked by as the plane continued its journey eastward, carrying with it a tension that Amara could feel building, not just in her chest, but throughout the cabin around her. The flight had been in the air for nearly an hour when Amara felt the tightness in her chest getting worse. Each breath became a little more labored than the last. She tried to stay calm, knowing that panic would only make her symptoms worse, but it was getting harder to ignore the wheezing that had started deep in her lungs. Tom noticed her discomfort. "Are you okay?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "My asthma's acting up," Amara replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I really need my inhale." "The one that flight attendant took?" Tom's eyebrows shot up. "That's ridiculous. Let me help you get it back." Before Amara could respond, Tom pressed the call button. The light blinked above their seats, but no one came. He pressed it again, holding it down longer this time. A different flight attendant appeared, younger, with kind eyes and a name tag that read, "Lisa. How can I help you?" Lisa asked. "This young lady needs her inhaler," Tom explained. The other flight attendant, Deborah, took it away from her earlier, and she's having trouble breathing now. Lisa looked confused. "Took away her inhaler? That's not our policy at all." "She said I needed to have declared it," Amara explained, her words coming between increasingly shallow breaths. "She said I could only use it under supervision in the galley." Lisa's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "That's absolutely not correct. Let me get your inhaler for you right away." As Lisa headed toward the front of the plane, Amara noticed more passengers watching the situation unfold. The woman 3 rows ahead had turned around again, and now the man sitting next to her was watching too. The young man across the aisle had removed his headphones. A few minutes passed, but Lisa didn't return. Amara's breathing was becoming more labored. The familiar panic of not being able to get enough air was setting in, a feeling she'd experienced during bad asthma attacks before, but never at 30,000 feet without access to her medication. "I'm going to go see what's taking so long," Tom said, unbuckling his seatbelt. Just as he stood up, Deborah appeared at their row with Lisa trailing behind her, looking uncomfortable. "Is there a problem?" Deborah asked, her voice cool. "Yes, there's a problem," Tom said firmly. "This young lady needs her inhaler. She's having trouble breathing." Deborah glanced at Amara, who was now visibly struggling for breath. "If you're experiencing a medical issue, I can make an announcement to see if there's a doctor on board." "She doesn't need a doctor right now. She needs the inhaler you took from her," Tom insisted, his voice rising. Deborah's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to need you to lower your voice and return to your seat. We can't have passengers creating disturbances. The only disturbance here is you refusing to give a young woman her necessary medication," Tom shot back. Several passengers murmured in agreement. The scene was drawing more attention now. A woman from across the aisle spoke up. "I saw you take her inhaler earlier. There was no reason for that." "Give it back to her." Deborah looked around, seeming to realize that people were watching and judging her actions. "I was following protocol for unidentified substances." "It's clearly an inhaler," interrupted another passenger. "It says albuterol right on it." Amara was now hunched forward, one hand pressed against her chest, the other gripping the armrest. Each breath came with an audible wheeze. Lisa looked increasingly alarmed. "Deborah, we need to give her the inhaler," Lisa said quietly. "I make the decisions in my section," Deborah hissed back. At that moment, a woman stood up from 2 rows behind and made her way forward. "Excuse me," she said with authority. "I'm Dr. Sharma, a pulmonologist. This young woman is having an asthma attack and needs her medication immediately." Dr. Sharma knelt beside Amara's seat. "Try to take slow breaths," she instructed gently. Then she looked up at Deborah with steel in her eyes. "Where is her inhaler? This is a medical emergency." Deborah hesitated, looking trapped. More passengers were watching now, and someone a few rows back had their phone up, possibly recording. "The inhaler, now." Dr. Sharma's voice left no room for argument. Reluctantly, Deborah reached into her pocket and pulled out Amara's inhaler. She handed it to Dr. Sharma, who quickly passed it to Amara. With shaking hands, Amara shook the inhaler and took a puff, holding her breath for a moment before exhaling slowly. The relief wasn't immediate, it never was with asthma, but knowing the medication was working its way into her lungs eased some of her panic. "What's going on back here?" A new voice entered the fray. The lead flight attendant, a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and a name tag that read Monica. This flight attendant confiscated a passenger's inhaler, Dr. Sharma explained, still kneeling beside Amara. "The passenger is having an asthma attack and was denied access to her medication until now." Monica looked sharply at Deborah. "Is this true?" "I was following security protocols for unidentified. It's an inhaler," Monica cut her off. "A clearly labeled prescription inhaler." She turned to Lisa. "Get the first aid kit and some water, please." Then she addressed Amara directly. "I am so sorry this happened. Are you feeling any better?" Amara nodded, still focusing on her breathing but feeling the medication starting to work. "A little," she managed to say. The cabin had grown quiet, with many passengers openly staring now. Several had phones out recording the scene. Monica noticed this and frowned. "Dr. Sharma, may I speak with you for a moment?" Monica asked, leading the doctor a few steps away. They spoke in hushed tones, but their body language made it clear that Monica was taking the situation seriously. Meanwhile, Deborah stood rigidly by the row, her face a mask of defiance despite being clearly in the wrong. Lisa returned with water and the first aid kit. Dr. Sharma came back to check on Amara. "Your color is better," she said, placing 2 fingers on Amara's wrist to check her pulse. "How's your breathing now?" "Easier," Amara replied, her voice still strained but stronger. "Thank you. Take another puff of your inhaler in a few minutes if you need it," Dr. Sharma advised. "I'll be in seat 30C if you need any help." As Dr. Sharma returned to her seat, Monica addressed Deborah. "Go to the forward galley. We'll discuss this later." Her tone left no room for argument. Deborah's face flushed, but she turned and walked stiffly toward the front of the plane. Several passengers watched her go with disapproving looks. Monica turned back to Amara. "I've informed the captain of the situation. Is there anything else you need right now?" "No, thank you," Amara replied, still clutching her inhaler tightly. "I just need to rest. Of course, I'll check on you regularly, and Dr. Sharma is nearby if needed." Monica's kind but professional manner was a stark contrast to Deborah's earlier behavior. As Monica walked away, Tom turned to Amara. "That was completely unacceptable what she did to you." "I know," Amara said quietly. She was feeling better physically, but emotionally she was shaken. The public nature of what had just happened, being singled out, having her medical needs dismissed, needing others to advocate for her, left her feeling both grateful and humiliated. "You should file a complaint," said the woman across the aisle who had spoken up earlier. "What she did was dangerous." Amara nodded but didn't respond. She was still processing everything. A young man a few seats ahead turned around. "I got most of it on video," he said. "If you want it for your complaint." "Thank you," Amara replied, though she wasn't sure if she wanted to watch herself struggling to breathe while being denied her medication. As conversations resumed around the cabin, Amara could hear snippets about what had just transpired. "Can't believe she took her inhaler. Did you see how she treated her? Definitely seemed racist to me." "Could have been really serious." Amara closed her eyes, trying to center herself. The tightness in her chest was subsiding, but a new heaviness had settled there. The familiar weight of being treated differently, of having to fight for basic dignity and care that others received without question. What Amara didn't know was that the videos were already making their way onto social media. The young man who had recorded the incident had connected to the plane's Wi-Fi and uploaded a clip to his TikTok account with the caption, "Flight attendant takes black teen's inhaler during asthma attack. Racism. Airline fail. Help her." Another passenger had tweeted about the incident, tagging the airline with, "Witnessing appalling racist behavior from your flight attendant right now. Took a black girl's asthma inhaler and refused to return it even when she couldn't breathe. Captain needs to be informed. Return the inhaler." As the plane continued its journey eastward, the digital ripples of what had occurred in row 28 were spreading far beyond the confines of the aircraft. On the ground, people were already sharing, commenting, and expressing outrage. The airline's social media team had just received the first notifications about a potentially serious incident unfolding on one of their flights. Back in her seat, Amara took another puff from her inhaler and leaned her head against the window, watching the clouds pass below. She had no idea that by the time the plane landed, thousands of people would know her story, or that the events that had just transpired would have consequences that extended far beyond this flight. 2 hours into the flight, Amara's breathing had stabilized, but she remained on edge. Every time a flight attendant passed by her row, she tensed up, half expecting Deborah to return and cause more trouble. But Deborah hadn't reappeared in their section of the plane. Lisa, the younger flight attendant, had checked on Amara several times, bringing her extra water and making sure she was comfortable. Dr. Sharma had also stopped by once to see how she was doing. "Your color is much better," Dr. Sharma observed, her experienced eyes noting Amara's improved condition. "How's your breathing now?" "Much better, thank you," Amara replied. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Dr. Sharma's expression darkened slightly. "What happened to you was completely Acceptable. There's absolutely no medical or security reason to confiscate a clearly labeled prescription inhaler. Tom, who had remained a steady presence beside Amara, nodded in agreement. I've been flying for 40 years and I've never seen anything like it. Unfortunately, I have, Dr. Sharma said quietly. She glanced around and lowered her voice. Look, I don't want to presume anything, but as a woman of color myself, I've seen this kind of treatment before. The way she singled you out, it wasn't right. Amara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She'd been trying not to think about the racial component of what had happened, but it was hard to ignore. She'd noticed how differently Deborah had treated white passengers, how her demeanor had changed when interacting with Amara. I've filed an incident report with the lead flight attendant, Dr. Sharma continued. As a medical professional, I documented that your care was dangerously compromised. They'll have that in their records. Thank you, Amara said, genuinely moved by the woman's advocacy. As Dr. Sharma returned to her seat, the young man who had recorded the incident leaned across the aisle toward Amara. Hey, just so you know, some of us posted about what happened online. It's getting a lot of attention already. Amara's eyes widened. Online, like on social media? He nodded. I hope that's okay. People need to see this stuff when it happens. The video I posted has over 10,000 views already, and it's only been up for like an hour. Amara wasn't sure how to feel about this development. On one hand, she believed in holding people accountable for their actions. On the other hand, she hadn't asked to become the center of a viral moment. She just wanted to visit her grandmother without incident. I didn't show your face clearly, the young man added quickly, seeming to sense her discomfort. It's mostly focused on the flight attendant and her actions. Before Amara could respond, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some mild turbulence ahead. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precaution. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin and take your seats. As if on cue, the plane gave a slight lurch. Passengers who had been standing quickly made their way back to their seats. Lisa hurried through the cabin, checking that seatbelts were fastened and tray tables were up. When she reached Amara's row, she paused. How are you feeling? She asked, genuine concern in her eyes. Better, thank you, Amara replied. Lisa glanced around and then leaned in slightly. I just want you to know that most of us aren't like Deborah. What she did was wrong and she knows it. The captain's been informed and there will be consequences when we land. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, jostling the cabin. I need to take my seat. But I'll check on you after we're through this turbulence, Lisa promised before continuing down the aisle. Tom, who had been pretending to read his newspaper while listening to the conversation, set it down. Sounds like they're taking this seriously. Good. Amara nodded but remained quiet, still processing everything that had happened and what it might mean. The plane continued to bounce through rough air, but Amara barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the confrontation with Deborah, imagining what might happen when they landed, wondering what her mother would say when she heard about all this. After about 20 minutes, the turbulence subsided and the seatbelt sign dinged off. The cabin atmosphere relaxed again as passengers resumed their mid-flight routines. Some got up to stretch their legs while others queued for the bathrooms. Monica, the lead flight attendant, appeared at Amara's row. Ms. Jackson, may I speak with you for a moment? Amara was surprised that Monica knew her name but nodded. Sure. Monica knelt in the aisle beside Amara's seat, keeping her voice low. First, I want to personally apologize for what happened earlier. Deborah's actions were completely contrary to our airline policies and our values as a company. Thank you, Amara said, not sure what else to say. I've spoken with the captain, and he's reported the incident to our ground team. When we land, there will be a customer service representative waiting to speak with you if you're willing. They'll want to take your statement about what happened. Amara felt a flutter of anxiety. Am I in trouble? Monica looked startled by the question. No, absolutely not. You did nothing wrong. This is about addressing Deborah's unacceptable behavior. She paused, choosing her words carefully. We're aware that videos of the incident are circulating online. Our social media team has already contacted the main office about it, so it had gone beyond just a few posts. Amara felt a mix of vindication and uneasiness. There's one more thing, Monica continued. Several passengers have come forward to give statements supporting your account of what happened. Dr. Sharma has provided a medical assessment as well. We're taking this very seriously. Amara nodded, grateful but overwhelmed. Do you need anything else for the remainder of the flight? Monica asked. No, I'm okay now, thank you. As Monica left, Tom gave Amara an encouraging smile. Sounds like they're not going to sweep this under the rug. I guess not, Amara replied, still trying to wrap her head around how quickly everything had escalated. The flight continued without further incident. Deborah remained conspicuously absent from their section of the plane. Amara noticed passengers occasionally glancing her way, some with curiosity, others with sympathy. It was strange being at the center of attention when all she'd wanted was to use her inhaler and travel in peace. About an hour before landing, Lisa came by with a snack service. When she reached Amara's row, she had an extra bottle of water and a warm cookie. Thought you might like something special, she said with a kind smile. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Amara said, accepting the offerings. Just ready to be on the ground? I bet. Not much longer now. Lisa hesitated. Just so you know, Deborah's been contained in the forward galley for the rest of the flight. You won't have to deal with her again. Amara appreciated this information more than she could express. The thought of facing Deborah again had been lingering in the back of her mind. As the flight began its initial descent, Amara checked her phone, temporarily turning off airplane mode. Immediately, messages from her mother started pouring in. Amara, someone sent me a video. Are you okay? Call me as soon as you land. I'm contacting the airline right now. This is unacceptable. Your father is furious. He's already talking to his lawyer friend. Amara quickly sent a reassuring text. I'm fine now, Mom. Landing soon. We'll call you after. She switched her phone back to airplane mode before more messages could come through. The plane descended through the clouds, the city of Philadelphia coming into view below. Amara felt the familiar popping in her ears as the cabin pressure changed. She took a preventative puff from her inhaler, grateful to have it back in her possession. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into Philadelphia International Airport, the captain announced. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for landing. As the plane made its final approach, Amara looked out the window at the city where her grandmother lived. The reason for her journey, what should have been a routine flight, had turned into something much bigger. She wasn't sure yet how she felt about being thrust into this position, becoming the center of a viral incident highlighting racial bias. The plane touched down smoothly, the thrust reversers roaring as they slowed the aircraft. Passengers applauded briefly, a tradition on some flights that always made Amara smile despite knowing it was unnecessary. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Philadelphia, where the local time is 4:17 p.m., the captain announced. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate, and the seatbelt sign has been turned off. As they taxied to the terminal, Amara noticed several passengers looking at their phones, their expressions suggesting they were reading about or watching what had happened earlier on the flight. The young man across the aisle caught her eye. It's everywhere, he said, showing her his screen. Your story has gone viral. The return the inhaler is trending. Amara's mouth went dry. She peered at his phone, seeing a Twitter feed full of outraged comments, shares of the video, and calls for the airline to take action. Her face wasn't clearly visible in the video thumbnail, but the scene was unmistakable. Deborah standing over her, Dr. Sharma intervening, the inhaler being reluctantly returned. What's going to happen now? Amara asked quietly, almost to herself. Tom, overhearing, patted her arm gently. Justice, hopefully, he said. What that flight attendant did was dangerous discrimination, plain and simple, and now everyone can see it. As the plane pulled up to the gate, Amara gathered her belongings, making sure her inhaler was safely in her pocket this time. She had a feeling the next few minutes were going to be unlike any arrival experience she'd had before. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the usual rush to stand and retrieve their items from the overhead bins. But there was a different energy in the cabin, a buzz of conversation about what they had witnessed, a sense that something significant had happened. Monica's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special request. We ask that you allow passenger Amara Jackson to deplane first. Our customer service team is waiting to speak with her. Thank you for your cooperation. All eyes turned to Amara, who felt her face grow warm with the sudden attention. But there was support in those gazes, nods of encouragement, small smiles of solidarity. Go on, Tom said, standing to let her out. And remember, you did nothing wrong. Hold your head high. Taking a deep breath, Amara stood, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into the aisle. As she made her way toward the front of the plane, several passengers murmured words of support. You stay strong, honey. We all saw what happened. We've got your back. These small affirmations gave Amara strength as she approached the front of the plane. Monica stood by the exit door, a sympathetic smile on her face. Behind her, through the window of the jet bridge, Amara could see several people in airline uniforms waiting. Ready? Monica asked gently. Amara nodded, clutching her backpack strap tightly. Ready? As she stepped off the plane, she was met by a small group of airline representatives. One woman stepped forward, extending her hand. Ms. Jackson, I'm Diane Roberts, Customer Relations Manager. On behalf of our airline, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. We'd like to speak with you about what happened, if you're willing. Behind them, other passengers were beginning to deplane, many watching the scene with interest. My grandmother is waiting for me, Amara said, suddenly remembering the purpose of her trip. She doesn't know about any of this. Of course, Diane nodded. We can arrange for someone to escort you to meet your grandmother first, and then perhaps you and she could join us briefly afterward. We won't take much of your time. Amara considered this. Her grandmother was 78 years old and had been excited about picking her up at the airport. The last thing Amara wanted was to worry her. Okay, she agreed, but I need to explain things to my grandmother myself. Absolutely, Diane assured her. And Ms. Jackson, I want you to know that we're taking this incident extremely seriously. What happened on that flight is not representative of our airline's values or policies. As they walked together toward the terminal, Amara couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. One thing was certain. The next 10 minutes were going to change more than just her day. They were about to change the course of Deborah Winter's career, spark conversations about racial bias in air travel, and add Amara's story to a national dialogue about discrimination that extended far beyond one flight. What had started as a simple trip to visit her grandmother had become something much bigger. A moment of reckoning for one flight attendant, one airline, and perhaps in some small way, for a society still struggling to ensure that everyone could breathe freely. While Amara walked through the terminal with Diane Roberts, the airline's customer relations manager, the videos of the incident continued their rapid spread across social media platforms. Users were sharing, commenting, and expressing outrage at what they saw as a clear example of racial discrimination. In the airline's corporate headquarters, the social media team was in crisis mode. Within 2 hours of the first post going viral, the hashtag #TheReturnTheInhaler had accumulated over 50,000 mentions. News outlets had begun reaching out for comments, and the airline's stock price had already taken a small but noticeable dip. This is exploding faster than anything I've seen before, said James Chen, the head of the airline's social media response team, addressing a hastily assembled group of executives in the crisis management room. The video is clear, the discrimination is obvious, and the fact that it involved denying a minor access to life-saving medication makes this particularly damaging. On the wall-mounted screens, they could see real-time metrics of the growing online storm. Comments ranged from expressions of sympathy for Amara to calls for boycotts of the airline. What do we know about the flight attendant? Asked Victoria Hayes, the airline's chief communications officer. James clicked through to another screen. Deborah Winters, 47, 15 years with the company, and this isn't her first incident. The room grew quiet as the executives processed this information. What kind of previous incidents? Victoria asked, her voice tight. 3 formal complaints in the past 2 years, all from passengers of color, all alleging unfair treatment. James scrolled through the file. None as serious as this one, and all were resolved with standard apology procedures. But there's definitely a pattern. Why wasn't this flagged? Demanded the CEO, Michael Thompson, who had joined the meeting remotely from a business trip. 3 complaints in 2 years should have triggered a review. No one had a good answer for that. The airline's HR policies were supposed to identify problematic behavior patterns, but somehow Deborah Winters had slipped through the cracks. The plane landed 17 minutes ago, James reported. Our ground team met the passenger, Amara Jackson, and is escorting her to meet her grandmother. Deborah Winters has been isolated and is being interviewed by HR as we speak. What about the other passengers who witnessed the incident? Victoria asked. Many have already posted their accounts online. Our team at the gate is collecting statements from those willing to provide them. Michael Thompson leaned forward toward his camera. I want an official statement ready in the next 15 minutes. Make it clear, direct, and unequivocal. We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind. We are investigating thoroughly and we will take appropriate action. No corporate doublespeak. As the communications team rushed to draft a statement, another screen in the room displayed news headlines that were already forming. Airline under fire after flight attendant denies black teen's asthma medication. Viral video shows flight attendant confiscating inhaler from minor. Return the inhaler. Racism at 30,000 feet? Meanwhile, in the terminal at Philadelphia International Airport, Amara spotted her grandmother waiting in the arrivals area. Despite everything that had happened, seeing her grandmother's familiar face brought tears to her eyes. Grandma, Amara called, quickening her pace. Her grandmother looked up, her face lighting up with a smile that quickly shifted to concern as she noticed Amara's emotional state and the airline representative accompanying her. Amara, baby, what's wrong? She asked, opening her arms for a hug. Amara fell into the embrace, suddenly feeling the full weight of the day's events. Something happened on the plane, Grandma. I'm okay, but it was scary. Her grandmother held her tight, then looked over at Diane with questioning eyes. Mrs. Jackson, I'm Diane Roberts with the airline. Diane introduced herself. There was an unfortunate incident on your granddaughter's flight. She handled herself with remarkable poise, but we'd like to speak with both of you briefly, if that's possible. Amara's grandmother, a retired school principal with a backbone of steel and a lifetime of experience dealing with injustice, straightened her shoulders. What kind of incident? Amara explained quickly, downplaying some details to avoid worrying her grandmother too much. But her grandmother was perceptive. So this flight attendant took your inhaler because... Her voice trailed off, the unspoken question hanging in the air. I don't know for sure why she singled me out, Amara said quietly. But she didn't do it to anyone else. Her grandmother's expression hardened. I see. She turned to Diane. Yes, we'll speak with your people. Right now. Diane led them to a private lounge reserved for premium passengers. Inside, a small team waited. The airport's customer service director, a representative from the airline's legal department, and the captain of Amara's flight. The captain stood as they entered. Ms. Jackson, I'm Captain Wilson. I want to personally apologize for what happened on my aircraft today. As soon as I was informed of the situation, I authorized the lead flight attendant to take appropriate action. Thank you, Amara replied, surprised to see the captain involved. They sat around a table, and the airline representatives explained that they wanted to take Amara's statement about the events. With her grandmother's permission, Amara recounted everything that had happened, from Deborah's initial cold treatment to the confiscation of her inhaler, to Dr. Sharma's intervention. The representatives asked clarifying questions, taking detailed notes. When Amara finished, her grandmother spoke up. My granddaughter could have died, she said, her voice steady but intense. An asthma attack at high altitude without medication is potentially fatal. This goes beyond poor customer service or even discrimination. This was dangerous. The representatives nodded solemnly. The legal representative spoke for the first time. Mrs. Jackson, you're absolutely right. The severity of this incident is not lost on us. That's why we've taken immediate action. What kind of action? Amara's grandmother asked. Diane and the others exchanged glances. The captain nodded, giving permission to proceed. Deborah Winters has been terminated, effective immediately, Diane said. Her conduct was a clear violation of our policies, our values, and arguably the law. There is zero tolerance for discrimination at our airline, and absolutely zero tolerance for actions that endanger passengers. Amara felt a strange mix of emotions at this news. She hadn't set out to get anyone fired, but part of her felt relief knowing that Deborah wouldn't be able to treat other passengers the way she had treated Amara. We're also conducting a full review of our training. Procedures, the customer service director added. His incident has highlighted gaps in our system that we need to address. And what about my granddaughter? Amara's grandmother asked. What are you doing for her? We would like to offer Amara full compensation for today's flight, vouchers for future travel, and an additional goodwill compensation for the distress she experienced, Diane explained. We're prepared to discuss an appropriate amount. We're not here for money, her grandmother stated firmly. We're here for accountability and change, and we want both, the legal representative assured her. The compensation is not to buy silence or to make this go away. It's an acknowledgement of our failure and the distress it caused. As they continued discussing terms, Amara checked her phone. The messages and notifications were overwhelming. Friends had seen the videos and were texting to check if she was okay. Her mother had called 6 more times. And when she opened Twitter, she was shocked to see their son return the inhaler trending nationally. "Grandma," she whispered, showing her the phone. "It's everywhere." Her grandmother looked at the screen, then back at the airline representatives. "It seems the court of public opinion has already rendered its verdict." The customer service director nodded grimly. "Yes, we're aware of the social media situation. Our communications team is preparing a public statement." "Will you be naming my granddaughter in this statement?" her grandmother asked sharply. "No, absolutely not," Diane assured her. "We'll respect Amara's privacy. The statement will address the incident and our response without identifying her specifically." Amara was relieved. While part of her was glad that what happened was being exposed, she wasn't sure she wanted to be the public face of this incident. Their meeting continued for another 20 minutes, during which the airline representatives outlined additional steps they would take. A formal apology, a review of Deborah Winter's history with the company to determine why previous complaints hadn't led to corrective action, and an enhanced training program for all flight attendants focusing on bias awareness and medical accommodation policies. As they were wrapping up, Diane received a message on her tablet. She glanced at it, then looked up at Amara and her grandmother. "Our CEO has just issued a public statement about today's incident. He's apologized unconditionally and announced Deborah Winter's termination. He's also acknowledged that we need to do better as an organization." While they were still in the meeting room, the airline statement was released across all social media platforms and sent directly to news outlets. "Today, a member of our flight crew violated the trust of our passengers by confiscating a young passenger's prescribed asthma medication, putting their health at risk and failing to uphold our core values of respect, safety, and inclusion. This behavior was unacceptable and resulted in the immediate termination of the employee involved. We are deeply sorry to the passenger affected and to everyone who witnessed or has since become aware of this incident. We are conducting a comprehensive review of our training and complaint tracking procedures to ensure nothing like this happens again. Discrimination has no place in our airline or in our society." The statement was direct, unambiguous, and did exactly what the CEO had demanded. No corporate doublespeak, just a clear acknowledgement of wrongdoing and concrete action. As Amara and her grandmother finally left the airport, the grandmother's car service waiting to take them home, Amara felt drained but somehow lighter. What had happened was wrong and scary, but the swift response, both from fellow passengers on the plane and from the airline afterward, gave her hope. "You know," her grandmother said as they settled into the back seat of the car, "when I was your age, something like this would have happened with no cameras, no social media, no accountability. The world's not perfect, baby, not by a long shot. But sometimes justice comes a little quicker than it used to." Amara leaned her head on her grandmother's shoulder, finally allowing herself to relax. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, but she ignored it for now. There would be time later to respond to friends, to talk to her parents, to process everything that had happened. For now, she was safe. She could breathe freely, and she was with her grandmother, the whole reason for her journey in the first place. What she didn't know yet was that the ripple effects of today's events were just beginning. In the coming days, her story would spark a national conversation about racial bias in air travel, lead to policy reviews across multiple airlines, and become a case study in how social media can drive accountability in the modern age. All because one flight attendant made a terrible decision, and 10 minutes later paid the price for it. 1 week after the flight incident, Amara sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, sipping hot chocolate and scrolling through news articles on her tablet. The story had evolved beyond her specific experience and sparked a broader conversation about discrimination in the airline industry. "Listen to this, Grandma," Amara said, reading aloud from an industry publication. "In response to the Return the Inhaler incident, 5 major airlines have announced reviews of their medical accommodation policies and enhanced anti-bias training programs for all customer-facing staff." Her grandmother looked up from the vegetable soup she was stirring on the stove. "That's something good coming from something bad." How are you feeling about all of it? Amara set down her tablet, considering the question. The past week had been a whirlwind. After the initial viral explosion of the video, she had received hundreds of messages of support. News outlets had requested interviews, which she had declined. She had spoken privately with Dr. Sharma, who had checked on her well-being and offered to connect her with advocacy groups if she wanted to become more involved in addressing healthcare discrimination. I'm okay, Amara said finally. Sometimes it feels weird that something that happened to me has become this big thing that people are talking about, but if it helps make sure no one else goes through what I did, then I'm glad. Her grandmother nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's how change happens, honey. One person's story touches people, and suddenly everyone's paying attention to something they've been ignoring. The airline had been true to its word. Beyond the immediate firing of Deborah Winters, they had launched a comprehensive review of their complaint handling procedures. It turned out that Deborah's previous complaints had been processed by different customer service representatives who didn't have access to her complete history. The airline was now implementing a centralized system to track such incidents and flag patterns of behavior. Amara's phone rang, a FaceTime call from her parents. She answered to see both their faces on the screen, her father's serious expression and her mother's warm smile. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. How's everything at home? We're fine, sweetheart, her mother replied. Your father has some news. Her father, a lawyer who had been quietly furious about the incident, cleared his throat. I just got off the phone with the airline's legal team. They're offering a formal settlement agreement. Amara's grandmother moved into frame, wiping her hands on her apron. What kind of settlement? Financial compensation, of course, her father said. But more importantly, they want Amara's input on their new training program. They're creating a case study based on what happened, to be used in training all their staff, and they'd like Amara to consult on it, if she's comfortable with that. Amara was surprised. They want my help, but I don't know anything about training flight attendants. You know what it felt like to be discriminated against, her mother said gently. That's the perspective they need. It was a lot to think about. Part of Amara wanted to put the whole incident behind her and return to normal teenage life. Another part recognized the rare opportunity to create real change. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course, her father assured her. There's no rush to decide. After the call ended, Amara and her grandmother ate lunch together in thoughtful silence. Finally, her grandmother spoke. You know, when I was teaching, I had this quote on my classroom wall. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Sometimes opportunities to do that come in ways we don't expect. Amara nodded, considering her grandmother's words. I think I will help them with the training. Not for the money, but because maybe it will make a difference. Her grandmother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm proud of you. Later that afternoon, Amara received an unexpected email from Lisa, the kind flight attendant who had helped her during the incident. Lisa had reached out through the airline's HR department to share her perspective. I wanted you to know that what happened on our flight has already changed things for the better, Lisa wrote. We had an emergency staff meeting about medical accommodations and bias awareness. People are talking openly about things that were swept under the rug before. Some of us are forming a diversity committee to address these issues more systematically. Your courage in speaking up has made a difference. The email brought tears to Amara's eyes. It was one thing to see headlines about policy changes, but another entirely to hear from someone directly involved that real change was happening. That evening, as Amara helped her grandmother water the plants on her small balcony, they talked about Deborah Winters. Do you ever wonder what happened to her? Amara asked. Her grandmother considered the question. I imagine she's having a hard time. Losing your job and being publicly labeled as a racist isn't easy. Do you think it was fair that she got fired? Fair. Yes. Actions have consequences, especially when those actions put someone's health at risk. Her grandmother adjusted her glasses. But that doesn't mean we can't hope she learns from this and becomes a better person. Amara nodded, appreciating her grandmother's wisdom. There was no satisfaction in knowing someone else was suffering, even someone who had treated her badly. What mattered was the change that came afterward. 2 weeks after the incident, Amara returned home to find an unexpected package waiting for her. Inside was a letter from Captain Wilson, who had piloted the flight, along with his captain's wings pin. In aviation, we have a saying, the letter read, The most important job of any crew member is to ensure the safety of all passengers. On that day, you showed more poise and courage than many adults would have. These wings are a small token to remind you that standing up for yourself and others is always the right course, even when it's difficult. Your actions have made our airline safer for everyone who flies with us. Amara pinned the wings to her backpack, a reminder not of the frightening experience she'd had, but of the positive changes that had come from it. A month after the incident, the hashtag #ReturnTheInhaler had evolved into a broader movement addressing discrimination in customer service across various industries. People shared their own stories of being denied necessary accommodations because of racial bias. Healthcare advocates used the momentum to push for better training for all service providers on respecting medical needs. The airline made good on its promises. They implemented new training programs, revised their complaint tracking systems, and adopted clearer policies about medical devices and medications. Other airlines followed suit, not wanting to be caught in a similar controversy. Dr. Sharma, who had been Amara's advocate on the flight, invited her to speak to medical students about her experience. Standing before a classroom of future doctors, Amara found her voice, sharing not just what had happened on the plane, but how it had made her feel, the fear, the humiliation, but also the hope that had come afterward when so many people stood up for what was right. Sometimes change happens because one person did something wrong, she told the students, but more importantly, because many people did something right. As for Deborah Winters, she eventually gave an interview to a local newspaper, expressing regret for her actions. "I never saw myself as prejudiced," she said, "but that day forced me to confront biases I didn't know I had. I'm working with a community organization now, learning and trying to be better." Whether her change of heart was genuine or simply an attempt to rehabilitate her image remained to be seen, but the fact that she was publicly acknowledging her wrongdoing was itself a form of accountability. 6 months after the incident, Amara received an invitation to speak at a national conference on diversity in transportation. She was nervous about public speaking, but felt compelled to share her story. Standing at the podium, looking out at the audience of industry professionals, she began, "My name is Amara Jackson, and 6 months ago, all I wanted was to breathe. Today, I want to talk about how that simple need changed not just my life, but policies and practices that affect thousands of travelers every day." Her story, of a flight attendant who made a terrible decision, and 10 minutes later was held accountable for it, had become part of a larger narrative about justice, change, and the power of bearing witness. In a world where prejudice often went unchallenged, Amara's experience had shown that speaking up mattered, that recording injustice mattered, that standing together against discrimination mattered. As she concluded her speech, Amara shared the perspective she had gained over the months since that fateful flight. "What happened to me was wrong, but what happened afterward gives me hope. It shows that we can learn from our mistakes, that institutions can change their ways, and that individuals can make a difference. Most importantly, it reminds us that everyone deserves the same basic dignity, including the simple right to breathe freely." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Amara had gone from being a victim of discrimination to a catalyst for change. Her story continued to inspire others to speak up when they witnessed injustice, to hold powerful institutions accountable, and to believe that even in small moments on ordinary days, the arc of history could bend toward justice, sometimes in as little as 10 minutes. And somewhere in the world, the next time a flight attendant approached a young passenger with an inhaler, they would remember Amara's story and respond with compassion rather than suspicion. Not because they feared being filmed and fired, but because they had learned to see humanity first before anything else.